All right. Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks for showing up, Rosano, and those who are here to listen to. I'm going to go through a couple of quick notes before we get started about Tools for Thought rocks, and then I'll let Rosano kick it off. Got it. All right. So yeah, Tools for Thought rocks. Welcome to this meetup group. I think I recognize a lot of the people in this room right now. So I think many of you have been here before. So welcome back. And if you're new though, Tools for Thought rocks is just a group of people who are getting together to talk about different tools for thought and ways that we can use computers as mediums for thinking. So that is a really broad purview. Everything from digital gardens, second brains, tools for thought, and even how is programming a tool for thought, and like that kind of stuff. So we really take a broad view of thinking and tools that are computers enable for thinking. So we've had a wide range of people come and talk about what they're working on. These talks tend to be pretty informal, and so feel free to, normally we have two speakers, and so we tend to, there's enough conversation that we tend to like run long. Since we only have one speaker today, we can have like more pronounced conversation or prolonged conversation, maybe pronounced as well. And Rosano, you can take a little more time than normally. We have like a 20-minute talk with like 10-minute Q&A, but you could take a little more time today. Couple links if you want to find out additional stuff about Tools for Thought rocks. All of you had to get here, you had to sign in through this Luma thing. We just use this as basically a community portal. So it has a calendar. If you're signed in through Luma, we have your email address, so you'll get notifications about upcoming events, which we try to have once a month. So you'll get some of those emails. And also we will post the links to the slides, or the slides and the recording to the Luma portal afterwards. So you can actually go through and browse the past talks and find the YouTube links there. Speaking of YouTube, we have a couple of different places where things congregate. One of them is we don't have our own Discord because I don't need another icon in the left bar of my Discord application. I've got way too many.
Nobody does.
Exactly. So we lean on the Fission Discord. If you guys are not familiar with Fission, it's a really cool product that makes IPFS easy to use. That's the easiest way that I can describe it. But thanks to Boris and the Fission team for letting us lean on some of their infrastructure, including their Discord and the Zoom link that we're currently using. There's also an organizers channel there. If you'd like to help out with organizing, and that could be everything from facilitating or recruiting speakers, or building a Tools for Thought rocks website that has a listing of all the previous events and maybe like public links to slides and stuff like that. If you'd like to help out with it in any way, feel free to volunteer. This is not like super elite or anything. YouTube, we have a YouTube channel that has all the past talks. You can go there, and then GitHub. We've experimented a little bit with
the link has changed. Because we're lining everything around Tools for Thought rocks. And so the link is now this one.
Yeah, if you drop it in chat, that'd be awesome.
In chat. And specifically, I'll actually bring that up. Right now, like that actual one is just notes from these sessions. I need to do a few more things like bring in chat logs. The chat logs often have really juicy links in them. But that's a very specific thing. If people want to help do the Tools for Thought notes for the Tools of Thought meetups. And in general, it's just gonna be an experiment of using logsec and a shared GitHub repo for this. So have a look, and we'll talk a little bit more after Rosano's talk about this as well with what we have in there so far.
Sweet. Sounds good. And then the last thing is, what are we doing today? This is the speaker series. These happen once a month. We try to rotate between time zones, which means that this one's earlier in the day. We may do one later in the day towards the end of November. It depends a little bit on which speakers are coming to show off what they're doing. If you'd like to speak about anything, feel free to apply. We have a little Airtable link, or just drop by Discord, chat with me, Boris, reach out to us through Twitter. However, you don't have to be a tool maker the way that Rosano is, and we'll be showing off his stuff. You could just be a tool user and want to talk about or a topic that's related to Tools for Thought that you want to talk about. pretty broad type things that we could talk about. One thing that I don't have in the slides right now is we've been doing the last several sessions what we call workflow walkthroughs, which is basically someone taking about 5 minutes to walk through the way that they use a specific tool. It could be a tool that an off-the-shelf tool, like for example, last month, Eric Burns, who's in the chat, he showed off how he uses Notion, how he organizes his thinking in Notion around several like key things. And I find that one of the reasons we try to do this is the way that the workflows about how we use tools is probably more important even than the tools themselves, especially when it comes to things like Notion. There's a similar tool set that like 5 or 10 or probably 20 different tools have to what Notion does. But we all use those tools in very different ways, and that we call workflows. And what we don't often get a view of is how people actually use their tool. And so we're trying with workflow walkthroughs to give people an opportunity to walk through how they actually use it, as opposed to the features that are sold on that tool's website. And you could almost view today's talk probably as an extended workflow walkthrough, as Rosano is going to be walking us through his stuff.
Totally.
So we do workflow walkthroughs. If you have because we have some extra time today and you thought, oh, I've got this thing I'd love to show off, and you would like to do that after Rosano talks, feel free to volunteer, let us know in chat if you want to do a workflow walkthrough today. If not, we usually have one spot for 1 or 2 each month. So you could, if you want a little more time to prepare, you could prepare one for November. Okay, that's a lot of preamble. Any other questions? Or Boris, did I miss anything?
All good.
Cool. Well, then I will briefly introduce Rosano and let him take it away. So as we were just noting, Rosano, I could not find a headshot of him, so that's totally fine. So I grabbed his Twitter icon. Rosano, I think this little icon is actually quite fitting for what Rosano is going to be talking about today. Rosano has been building a lot of little tools that work with one another, and tools that allow him to do things for himself and tools that allow other people to do things together, but are specifically around sort of this idea of thinking and collaborating together and sort of externalizing your thinking. So he'll have more to say about that, but I'm excited to see what kind of a glimpse inside of how all of this stuff in his digital presence has manifested. And so, yeah, I'll let Rosano take it away.
Amazing. Thank you, Jess, for that wonderful intro and for using my avatar, which I appreciate. Do I need to share sound? Okay. Let's see. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see a big yellow? Okay. Okay. So my name is Rosano. I'm going to be doing a presentation called Wetware of Writing and Doing. So you can think of it as how I use my apps to make things happen. And if you want to follow along with some of the links I'm presenting, you can go to rosano.ca/wetware, or I'll place that also in the chat. And so what am I doing? I'm working on apps. I'm writing stuff, I'm making screencasts, I'm working on events and projects. I have like about a dozen app website kind of things where I'm doing programming and bug fixes, features, stuff like that. I'm trying to write as often as I can. These are all like things that I've written, maybe about a couple dozen things over the course of this year. And I'm doing some screencasts, maybe like about a dozen of those. Some of them are kind of short, 5 minutes, 15 minutes. Some of them are like 45 minutes to an hour, mostly explaining like programming stuff, like how I do coding or ways I can use Launchlit, which is a programmer-oriented thing. I'm doing these events now, which is kind of new for me, mostly like online meetups and online discussions and stuff. Seems like I'm around like 3 a month right now. I don't know how long that's going to last, but at the moment I'm really into that. So organizing events sometimes with other people, and generally just been working on projects for most of my adult life. So I try to keep track of that stuff. And so I end up creating and producing and making and doing a lot of different things. So I have some kind of productivity system that I use to help me with that, which I call the Productivity Trinity. And I'm going to talk about I'm going to show like a lot of stuff and talk about a lot of different things, but I think it all sort of has to do with one of these three parts of the Trinity, which I'll just explain briefly here. The first part I call, and it's going to seem very familiar to anybody who's read other productivity books, but the first part I call capture everything, which is about just getting stuff out of your head, offload onto external systems, write it down, etc. That's the first one. Number two is organize if needed. So take that stuff and put it where you're likely to encounter it, where it's not going to be forgotten or where you're going to miss it. It's the second one. And the third one is purge, which is like do it, delete it, take it out of your focus as soon as possible. Probably I'll be more focused on like the first two, like how I collect things and organize them using the different apps and stuff. But again, in all of the maybe chaos of this presentation, it all sort of ties into one of these three things in some way. So the point of capturing for me is really about keep going. So I avoid interrupting myself when I'm doing things. I don't stop and like check out cool links or articles or videos that people send me. Like I do everything later. So I take it and I put it in somewhere else, and then I keep doing what I'm doing. And then when I make time to like read things or to watch things or to listen to music. And as I have to deliberately make time for those things, it can get neglected, but it seems like in my experience, it usually happens eventually at some point. So it works for me. I'm trying to collect everything from these different streams and timelines and stash them in what I call queues, which you can also think of as like buckets or like places to hold these different things. And I do that so that I can batch all of the reading at once, like all of the reading at once, all of the watching of the videos in the same place, same time. Like I'm very intentional about, okay, now I'm going to like listen to music. So let's look at all the music I have ready to listen, kind of thing. And so when you have all of this stuff and you're trying to do it all later, it helps to have a place to put everything, a place that's meaningful for all these different things. So that's why queues are such an important part of this. And most of the queues are basically things that I've made, but I'm just going to take a minute to highlight something that I haven't made, which is for reading, I use Pocket. And I do that because it syncs to my Kobo e-reader, because I don't like reading things on a screen with the light shining into my eyes. It may be bad for your eyes or maybe not, but I don't enjoy the experience of like reading on my phone or reading on my computer. So I queue it up so that it goes to my e-reader and I can read that, on the subway without internet connection, that type of thing. But again, batching all that stuff together so I don't stop what I'm doing. And I also, is just sort of a side note, like with email newsletters, I don't like reading things in my inbox because I find that kind of distracting and not part of my normal rhythm. So I try to like unsubscribe to as many newsletters as possible that have RSS feeds. And then I use a feed reader like this, which is called OneFeed. And I can sort of get it in a way that's more like a timeline and then put it into Pocket, etc. So those are queues I haven't, those are not my apps. And now I'm just going to show some of the apps that I've made, starting with Joybox. And I use this for audiovisual media, like video that people send me, or maybe podcasts, or maybe music. And like I said, I decide when I want to like watch things or listen to things. So when I'm ready to when I'm in the mood to listen to music, I have a tag for these items called listen. So I can just type that in and then all of the listen things come up and I can choose what I want to listen to and I can just click on them and then there's a player. It's very focused. Like I'm not doing this again, like this is what I'm doing now. I'm listening now. I'm not doing other things. So it's very focused and more or less distraction free. If I have like notes, I can take notes on whatever I'm consuming there. If I'm in the mood to watch something, there's like a visual tag. So I can click and I can watch. Sometimes if there's like talkie things where I don't have to actually like look at the screen, but I can have it on background and maybe do other things. Like I have a tag for that, but it just helps me organize all of these audiovisual media things that are coming my way and puts them by date. There's like metadata, I can add stuff, but it's very, like it's a nice place for all of this stuff for me. And it kind of calms me down because I'm like, okay, it's all there. I can choose when I want to get to it, etc. Also, sometimes I do share things with other people, and I like this idea of just being able to like pick a couple of things and then make a list or a playlist if you wish. And then somebody else who's never been to the app before, they can just open it up. Wow. They can just open it up, and this is what they see. So they see the things that I've shared with them, and they can have the same experience that I have, and then they can add it to their queue, so I'm not getting in their way, which I find cool. So now they can get rid of my list that I've sent them, and if they go back to this place, it's like they're sort of starting their own kind of queue, their own bucket for audiovisual media stuff. So sort of a tangent there, but that's something important for me. And yeah, so Joybox is, I think of it as like a queue for audiovisual media. I have commit, which I'm going to use Firefox to show. Okay, so I use it for languages mostly, languages that I'm already comfortable with to sort of provoke myself to speak it, or languages that I'm learning. For example, I'm doing this like Hindi French exchange with my father. He's teaching me Hindi, I'm teaching him French, and so I can write these cards. I can click this button, and the text to speech works really. It's good enough for me.
La lune est brillante.
So I can sort of listen to these things in different languages. I can play this memory game.
हर दिन गिटार बजाता है.
Try and
Rosano, you're blowing my mind. Can you just slow down a little bit?
Oh damn! Okay, yeah.
Because the audio and Rosano rapid fire into my brain, my buffer is overflowing.
Understood. Is it my connection or is it just me?
It is you being excitedly sharing things that are amazing.
I'm gonna have more tea. How about that?
And also,
there's caffeine in it.
Let's also just pause if anyone has any questions.
Oh yeah, I'm super terrible with chat when I'm like talking. So yeah, I should probably just stop and look in the chat. But yeah, feel free to also interrupt and ask.
So I was surprised that Joybox is like accessible to other people. I was like, when you were like, oh, now I can just share this link, and now other people can like create their own Joyboxes. And like, is that an open source project, or like how do you think about that piece of software that you put out in the world?
Well, it is an open source project. I just want to have people consuming things from different platforms in the same place. Like, I don't like this idea you have to do everything on YouTube or everything on Spotify. Like, let's mix platforms again. Maybe that'd be great. And yeah, I just really dig also this thing about sending someone the link. Sorry, I'll try to slow down. I like this idea of sending somebody a link and everything's there, and they can sort of add it to their own list. And without getting too technical, like there's no me or server involved in there. It's just kind of between you and that other person. So I kind of dig that. And actually that pattern of like sharing, creating, selecting documents, creating a link, sharing that with someone, having it show up in a sort of inbox for them is something that I want to implement in all of my apps. It happened sort of by coincidence with Joybox because it makes sense to do like a playlist and share a playlist. But I think like, man, like sharing my notes, like I have a couple notes I want to share with you. Let me just give you a link and it's all in there. Like, I think that's cool. So that pattern is interesting. Apart from that, like, I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah, it does. And I found the link on GitHub too, which is
yeah.
So in terms of like maintaining that, like, is that something that if you had people signing up for or start using Joybox, are you like intending to maintain that long term, or do you maintain that mainly for personal use? I guess that's part of what I was asking. Like,
you mean like funding? You mean like, do I want to make it sustainable?
To like abstract away the funding model, if I start using Joyboxes, it's still going to be around. That's
yeah, hopefully. I mean, at the moment, it's like I need to be alive and I need to keep on working on it. But ideally, there'll be other people involved who will also keep it going. And maybe if there's money coming in, then can maybe compensate people.
I really think that we should change the model for software developers, for open source creators, and we should call it the Keep Me Alive Fund. I really like that framing. Right? Everything from basic shelter and sustenance and power, all the way up to, we have to work on longevity tech so that Rosano can keep maintaining Joybox over the centuries.
I heard this a bit kind of hardcore idea, which maybe for me is a bit too far from the Earthstar Discord, of like this idea of like a coin operated website where like this website will go down in like 2 months unless somebody puts in a quarter, you know, like we don't need to do that because there's not really like costs to having the app, but it's, I mean, something like some consciousness about the fact that it needs to be sustainable and people should keep people alive. Like that's good. Yeah, I'm for that.
This came up recently, talking about back in the day for BitTorrent, there were leech ratios that tracked how much you were sharing versus how much you were downloading. And I think there's something interesting in that direction.
Got to give in order to get, yeah. Or well, something like that. So yeah, and I've also thought about like, because I'm hesitant to also reduce, I don't want to just make it about money. So it'd be cool if people could contribute, like maybe by translating or sharing on Twitter, or like the same thing you said for Tools for Thought, right? You can contribute in so many different ways. So contribution is a very rich thing. And but that also takes, just to articulate that and put it inside of the app and make it clear, that's also kind of like work. And so it's a process. I'm still figuring that out, really. I don't have like a clear answer.
Cool. That's great.
Yeah. So yeah, so commit for me is, it's like it's maybe the least of like the QE things, but it is kind of like it queues up the schedule for like reviewing cards, so I don't have to think about it. So it's like that's a place where I put those things, you know. I'm not like Andy Matushak, who uses spaced repetition for exploring domains of knowledge, you know. It's really just about this like language thing. But if I was doing that, then this would be the place to put that stuff, right? So that's commit. The third one I'm going to show is launchlet, which is also not really like a queue, but it removes the friction from the queuing process. It's like I can make things to make it easy to like move things around, basically. So I'll just show you the app real quick, but there's not much really to talk about there. It's like kind of a list of documents, and each one of them has some code, and then you can pipe all that up into this like launcher thing, which I'll demonstrate now. So for example, I'm reading an article, and again, I don't read articles on my screen. I need to send it to Pocket. So I have this thing where I can just call up a launcher and I can say Pocket the page, and it'll send it to Pocket. Sort of like a shortcut, I guess. And or Twitter threads. Like I don't like reading Twitter threads. This one is like larger than the screen, so I'm going to send it to the tweet compiler reader thing so that it becomes sort of like long form, or what is that called? Tweet Threadreader. Okay, so I open that tweet up over here, and then okay, it's going to gather the tweets, and then it's going to make it long form, and then from there I can say Pocket, and then from there it goes to my e-reader. So it's this shortcut thing helps me with doing these kinds of things. A last example is just like this inter-intellect community that I'm a part of. There's a lot of events that are there, and I find myself going to enough events where I actually made a shortcut to just copy the necessary information and put it into my text notes. So I made a shortcut for that. It's like inter-intellect event. I run the command, and then it basically copies this text here, which is like the time, the name, and the URL. And then I paste that in my notes app. So, so launchlet is like, it just helps remove friction from kind of what I'm trying to do, which is moving these things into different queues and stuff. Emoji log is for time-bound things. I don't use my note-taking app for journaling or like how I'm feeling right now, or like the moment. Like the journal is very like time, I call it a reference, right? So it's not time-bound things, and the time-bound things all go here in this more journal-oriented app. Each of these icons / sundials here is a kind of journal, and I've made all of these. They don't come with the app, and these are all different things that I'm essentially tracking or journaling, or I'm being aware of certain time-oriented event things. So for example, I track how many books I'm reading. So I have this book thing here, and inside of it, these are like books that I read. So when I read a book, I track it. I have like for more motivational things, like I track when I make a recipe, and then I can keep the URL here. I have this concept of when I do a screencast, I also do this, but you can use you can have custom schemas for these things. So the screencast is not just like a bunch of notes, but it also has like a video link, which is the first thing here. And it has a documentation link, which is over here. And it has a tweet link for the thing that I tweeted out if I need to share that specific thing to somebody, or if there's a thread there. And there's like a Fediverse post link. And so I've structured that so that I can have a place for all of those things. And it's sorted by time and it's part of the journal, etc. So that's generally what I use it for. There's other things that are more personal, like this truck thing here is actually my general purpose journal. So it can be notes from books, or it can be notes from conversations with friends, personal thoughts, all kinds of stuff that goes there. I have this thermometer thing, which is sort of like an emotion log thing where how am I feeling up and down. So that's kind of more personal, but it's all kind of, there's a place for all of it in here, and I can just have more. There's no limits really. So I find that kind of cool. I might just go on a small tangent here to show you this banner thing, because I just think it's nice to also misuse tools sometimes and do interesting things. So in pretty much all of my sites, I have this banner at the bottom. Here it says presenting wetware of writing a tools for thought. So it's referring to this event. It's sort of plugging the event, and I have it across of all my sites. So 2 different sites, you see the same banner at the bottom, and the information for that actually lives in here. So it's like one of these journal entries. It says there's the notes, and then there's the schema has like a link, and then it has this call to action text, and then the date of the event is actually like when it's supposed to show up on the banner. So I'm basically like writing some stuff in here, and then I say export selected journal, and then it spits out a bunch of JSON, which I can then give to some other system that I built to just show the right thing at the right time, basically. But I think it's kind of cool to it's not really meant to, this tool is not meant for this kind of thing. Like I'm sort of using the structured data, the schema aspect of it for like something that's not about like tracking necessarily, but also a useful thing to think about when you're dealing with tools. So end tangent on that.
Rosano, I have a question.
Yes.
What underneath emoji log? So a couple, well, they're kind of 2 maybe related questions. I'm not exactly sure. So underneath emoji log, it looked like you had like these entries that have some sort of format to them.
Yeah.
And then they're sort of partitioned, I guess, by these emojis. Basically, those are like categories.
Yeah, each of those emojis is like a journal. Like you could think of it as a notebook, and inside of those notebook, there's different entries. So you can have as many notebooks as you want, and as many entries as you want inside of those.
Got it. Okay, gotcha. So it's like notebooks and entries. That makes sense. And then the entries can have metadata in terms like they can have arbitrary fields that.
Yeah. So you can see here when I'm editing the journal, you can sort of add custom field, and I have one field which is called video, one field which is called garden link or documentation link, one field which is called Twitter, and I've added that specifically. I can call it whatever I want. So it allows me to structure the data.
Cool. And then the last question is, I noticed that the interface in emoji log looked really similar to your other
this thing. Yeah. It's called the catalog. It's actually like a kind of a reusable view. So I don't want to like reinvent the same thing over and over again. So I actually use the same view in all 5 of my apps, because it's nice to have this sort of list of stuff, filter, click, show the detail. Like that's a pattern I think that works really well. And it also translates well to mobile. And again, I don't want to like redo the same work for 5 or maybe now 6 or 7 times. So I like to reuse things. So it is literally the same thing with some difference. Like here, for example, okay,
is
this
something
one
you made? Is it?
It's like a component. Yeah, most of my apps, they're actually a collection or composition of like 90 different components that I've made, and they're all sort of individual projects on GitHub and not super well documented, but it's essentially like a composition of components. Yeah.
Just making an observation here in terms of there's one other self-made tool maker that I follow pretty closely and have had conversations with, a guy named Linus Lee. Some of you might know his website, like thecfist.com. And he's built a lot of his tools do the same thing. Like he uses the same UI patterns, the same fonts, the same things across his entire tool set. And yeah, exactly. And so if you like look at some of his projects, they tend to use like the same look and feel, maybe not down to the same like thing on the left, things on the right. But he's leaning on kind of this similar paradigms. And I wonder how much too that is, Rosana, you've like taught yourself to use a left list, and like when I click on it, it opens a thing on the right. And like you're really used to that workflow very generally across all your apps. And I think the CFIS apps tend to work in that, even though they're radically different from one another, they tend to work in a really similar way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of his, but I haven't tried to use his apps yet. So I didn't think it would be that consistent across the apps, but I want to take a look now that you mention it.
So I think when we say tools for thought, the other thing to think about is literally the tool maker making a real world tool will have a handle of the correct length, and it will form grooves and smoothness in a particular area. We don't think of it that way in digital patterns, but I attempt to recreate my personal workflows in whatever system I'm inhabiting. And that's also why I push for things like give me tags, give me @ mentions. That is the kind of handedness I need to compose a workflow if I'm dropping into an arbitrary tool.
It's like a vocabulary, or as Gordon Brandon says, like an alphabet. Compose different pieces together.
So I'm very glad, I've had various discussions on Twitter about this. I'm very glad that I can use Markdown syntax in many different places because I'm very familiar with it for entry. But that is separate from me thinking it's a good format to store things in, right? So that the handedness of Markdown is what a lot of developers like. And so when I tell them that it's bad, I'm attacking the handedness of their tool. I'm like, no, it's fine. You can totally use that as an interface. But for Christ's sakes, we're programmers. We know that data structures are important.
Yeah. I mean, it's like SQL, like I don't know how to explain SQL to people who don't use database software, but it's like there's only like one representation, and it's the same one that machines understand, and the humans have to type like machines essentially. And so it's kind of, there's a mismatch between like what machines need, what humans need. So trying to have different interfaces is helpful for that.
Absolutely. And I think like given no other changes in the next 6 months, ClojureScript's data log like query language is the de facto standard for queries for tools for thought graphs. Done. Why? Because Rome and logsec. I have no idea if Obsidian has a query language. Michael, you might know. You're muted.
I don't know. I mean, data view seems to be coming into play, but it's I think, as far as I understand, I'm not really a programmer, but that's its own query language. So it's not really a query language.
We can air quote a bunch of things, and hey, Mark Antoine, you probably have a comment on this. Not to drag this off in too much, but I think it's interesting.
Obsidian has a query interface, but not a language.
Right, and I think this is the other thing that's interesting, is that when a lot of these systems that are self-programmable aren't, because we can carve the handedness that we need, right? Rosano is doing this at a lower layer in actual programming languages, but Michael, for you and I that perhaps do less programming, we're using the tools that are available within the system.
Super interesting.
Rosano, back to you. Sorry.
Cool. I don't actually use query language, but I mean, yeah, I feel like at some point I should get into that. It's so like, what do you use it for? Just out of really quick, like.
So, I mean, this is the thing. So whether it's TiddlyWiki or logsec or Rome, you can build custom workflows, applications, interfaces, you name it, right? I can
List
without, simple things like filters. So a to-do list is show me the things that are tagged with to do and match a toggle to it, and don't show it on the list once the to do is toggled. And we've just built a to do list inside a tool for thought without having it go somewhere else.
Okay, that is powerful. Very complex, but it is powerful. Yeah. Yeah, I have this idea that like, well, launchlet for me, I mean, not to go too far into this programming thing, but like launchlet is like ideally like it could be like a programming environment for like everything, because you don't have to have each app implementing like programming stuff, but that works better in web than it does with like native stuff in Obsidian. So anyway, super interesting. Thanks for letting me know about that. I think I have, oh, just one more. Yeah. So yeah, I don't want to be on the screen for the whole call. So I'm just going to go with, try to finish my presentation. The big kahuna, Hyperdraft. So as I mentioned before, it's not time-bound stuff. It's like reference. So stuff in here, there's actually not even a whole lot of personal things in my notes, like, because that stuff is more like in other places. So this is, well, sorry, I just got a little lost. Yeah, it's a kind of reference. It's stuff that builds up over time, and it generally like leans toward either publishing or it's like to-dos. So yeah, but I use Hyperdraft for essentially everything else. So whatever I did mention in all of the tools that I mentioned so far, it all basically probably ends up here. Very small point on to-dos, like they're essentially just like bulleted list items for me, like this, you know, dash space text, like that's my to-dos for like hundreds of different things. So it's very plain text, very cheap. Something else I want to point out about Hyperdraft is that I do try to mix like public and private stuff at the same time, because Hyperdraft is like a publishing platform for me. So to give an idea, here is my digital garden / personal wiki, and it's online. It has a URL, but it lives inside of Hyperdraft in all of these notes. So I can actually show public notes here. And why is my computer so slow? Okay, so these are all notes that are essentially public on the website. And for this one here, welcome to the jungle, is like the home page. So I could go in here and I could say, welcome to the jungle X. And then I reload the page here and it should say X eventually after a second. So that's completely public, but it's in the context of my personal notes. And yeah, so I don't know if that's that common in other tools for thought. Like there are ways to sort of like publish notes, but I don't really see this idea of just like make a website, very simple and plug things together. And so I see like Roam, you can sort of share like essentially like a JavaScript app, and it's dynamic, and like there's a lot of stuff going on. But this idea of like just having like simple pages, like it seems to be less common. It does exist, but so that might be kind of novel in terms of what I'm doing. Hyperdraft also for me is a way to do like, I can capture things, I can put down different ideas, brainstorm, put even the bad ideas on paper, organize it all, group similar ideas together, create an outline from those things, draft a text from those outlines, and then maybe create like a final piece that's been massaged, and then publish that. Like that whole arc, I can basically do all within the same tool for me. And that's super useful. And it's on all of my devices. So it works on my phone, it works on my computer, and it's local first, so I can use it without internet access. When there is connectivity, everything syncs up and I don't have to think about it. So there's very little like discontinuity, like in terms of my workflow around writing and like getting things done. Like it's all always moving, like stuff is always in progress, which is nice. I would like to highlight some of the queues that I have within Hyperdraft. I think essentially like every note here is kind of like a queue in some sense, depending on how you look at it. But I want to highlight, for example, the queues I use for various newsletters. So
Rosano, Bill asks, what's the stack that you're using? So at some point cover that where it makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know if I can say that quick now, but yeah, maybe just remind me. So I have a newsletter, a weekly newsletter, and every time I think like, oh, okay, this would be good to publish there, I just dump it in this note, and then I leave as soon as possible. So I don't stop what I'm doing, I put it there, and then I go. And then when the time comes to write the newsletter, I just open up that note, and then I can work with what's there. I have another one for, anyway, I have a bunch of different ones, which I think I don't need to go into. I would also like to highlight the template I use for Ephemerata, which is like the weekly newsletter. So it's this big, huge text file here. And what I do with this is see these large, what's it called, screaming snake case variables here. So edition number. And so I can select multiple edition numbers in like 19 places. And I can say, this is edition number 018. And then it's updated in a bunch of places. And then I have this other thing here. And I say, this is the 18th edition. And then I have like a title, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. And then I take that title, and then I have this edition title, which is also in multiple places, including a tweet that I'm going to send out, and I just paste it there. So I find this workflow kind of interesting of like, it's a template. I could probably like program this in some more sophisticated way, but I think it's cool that I can just do this in the context of my Notes app because of this selecting multiple instances of the same word thing. So that's kind of interesting. And then the last thing is just like, if I don't have a specific place to put something and I'm not sure, there's this command called journal, which just creates this ugly title, but it's formatted the same way. So I can type things here. And then if I want to find them all, I just have to search for journal, essentially. And then I can see them all, and then I can maybe group them together somehow or just delete them or whatever. So nothing gets lost that way. And yeah, but there's a lot of stuff going on here in Hyperdraft, and but those are kind of the main things. I think I want to stop. Yeah, so I've been going on for a while, so I could also just like stop here. If you want me to just finish with this, like something about writing specifically, I could do that, or we could maybe just go to questions. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this has been really cool. I'm actually, yeah, why don't you finish up the writing without magic since you have a slide for it, and then we can talk maybe a little bit about Stack and how you built some of this stuff.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I wanted to talk about writing is just because I feel like it's something a lot of people find intimidating, or they think it's like you have to be inspired in order to do this. And I notice how, like, for me, it's completely unemotional and I'm very detached from it, and I could just kind of do it anytime. Like, oh, if I have an hour, I'll just write. So I want to kind of describe how all of this cue stuff plays into that. The way I see it is like, the way I see what I'm doing is 97% of it is stuff that anybody could do. You're just like collecting these things and putting them into different buckets. You can think about it like, dripping water into a bucket. Some buckets, they have 0 things. Some buckets, they only have like 1 thing. Some of them, they have a couple. Eventually, some of them will have like enough, or maybe they're overflowing, in which case I mark them with this thing called prompt, so that I can, when I feel like writing, I can just go to all the ones that are ready. And these are all the notes that I'm like ready to like write some thing about this. It's kind of a lot, and I haven't tried very hard to make this happen. It just kind of accumulates. I'm grouping related ideas together, and over time, it just overflows. If you're, doing your thing and checking out stuff and following your process, etc. So I don't think that takes some kind of special talent. And then specifically when I'm actually taking one of these things and writing it, for example, this is a post about being afraid to listen to music or something. So I have a bunch of points here, and I would describe what I do as like sort the points, group it into related collections, and then massage it into like paragraphs or something. Now we're getting into sort of creativity and personal expression, which is going to be a bit different in every person. But essentially, it's like, I think most of the work, it's not that magical. I reduce it to like moving stuff around. And I might just say that I'm not spending a lot of time like apping or like configuring or like dealing with the tool itself. Like the only thing you can really do here is write and type text. So the tool or the environment kind of affords that approach. So I just wanted to share a little bit about writing because maybe it might help it seem less intimidating to some people. And I'm not going to make a conclusion. So I'll just say thanks for being here, and shout out to Jesse and the Tools for Thoughtworks community for just organizing these events and for the motivation and the enthusiasm and meeting up on a regular basis. And also this idea of workflow walkthroughs, which gave me the prompt to make this presentation. I would not have had the thought to do this, and I'm really happy I did it. So just thanks to y'all for that. Feedback is always welcome. And if you like what I'm doing, I'm going to drop my open collective in the chat. Feel free to support my work. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Rosano. Like jazz hands.
Jazz hands.
Awesome work. Cool. I think some people had some questions. Do you want to talk briefly about Stack? I think it was Bill.
Oh, yeah. Okay. It's kind of like a 2019 stack. So I'm using Svelte. Sorry, I'm starting with a sort of Node.js server, and I'm using Svelte and Node TypeScript and Rollup to put everything together. And I deploy all of the apps as a static site, so there's no dynamic stuff going on. Everything is stored with either remote storage or Fission, or that's it. What else about the stack? Is that it? I think that's all.
Rosano, you made a change to your local. So you have this desktop application with in the top left, I saw it was Write was the name of the desktop application for Hyperdraft. So that is that like an Electron app? Like what is that like?
That's just something I hacked together because I'm always going to use Hyperdraft. It's always open, so I don't want to have to go through a browser. So I just figured out a way to get it with Electron, or it may even be this other tool on Mac where you can type in a URL and then it spits out like an app. Yeah, Fluid. Yeah, it might be that. I can't remember anymore, but because yeah, it's basically that.
Cool. So you had that, but one of the things that was crazy is like you made a change in that note and then you refreshed your homepage and it was already changed.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about like how did that magic happen?
Oh, notes are stored locally, local first, so it all gets written to like local storage, and then I happen to be using remote storage, but I think it also works the same way with Vision, where like periodically the stuff is synchronized to wherever your cloud storage. But also there's this concept of like public versus private. So by default, you're just always writing to private because everything's personal. And but you want to write something to your public folder if you want to have like a public URL that you can share with people. So I'm essentially writing another copy of that note to the public folder, which will then give me a URL, and then I can pass the URL onto you. And yeah, so whenever you change that public one, the site updates.
Mm-hmm. So you said you deploy the application or like as a static site, but the whole site didn't redeploy when you were when you added X.
The app is a static site, but the publishing of the notes is some totally separate thing. That's actually just like a static HTML file on its own, which actually has the entire it's just like an HTML file essentially. So you're not really deploying, more like just updating a file, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like FTP, old school. But
yeah. Cool. Other questions for Rosano?
So what I think something that's interesting is how do you think about how do you choose between building your own tool and using Pocket or Threadreader or whatever?
It depends on how uncomfortable it is. Like, I don't like a lot of things about Pocket, but it's not enough where I'm gonna like spend time and like make an app and put the components together and test it and like, so it's sort of about how inconvenient it is. Like, it was really inconvenient for me to use Simple Note, not to talk badly about them because it's a great app, but like I was using that for a while. And it's like, I can't, I want to like search, I want to hit escape and go back. I can't do anything. So like, I just started like slowly building another alternative. And then at some point, like that was enough where I could just actually use the prototype, and then I just started doing more and more of that. But I don't, yeah, I do it for, if it's really important for me, for like, yeah, anyway, it's basically about how frustrated I am with the tool that I'm using. So until I can't handle it, I have to like just.
So a tool that is not moldable,
Oh,
you need to break out and end up.
well, okay, like Anki, for example, which is the well-known like flashcards app that's been around for a while. It's also open source, lots of plugins. I could figure out how to program Anki, but I'm like, it's old and there's lots of stuff I don't like, and I like, okay, it's icky. I'm not gonna program it because it's icky, only because it's icky, you know. So that's, I don't know how to describe that. Oh, but also, yeah, maybe the text-to-speech thing, I don't actually know how to program it within their system. So it just felt like it would be simpler, maybe.
Yep.
One observation about your writing without magic comment. I don't know if anybody follows Dave Perel or Tiago Forte, Building a Second Brain. Dave Perel, the writing, I can't remember what his writing workshop is called, writing something.
Rite of passage.
Rite of
Rite of
passage.
passage.
So clever. They talk about writing in a very similar way. If you've ever heard them talk about it, that it's not something they have to sit down and like from scratch write an essay. It's mostly just like rearranging bits that they've already written and like compiling it into an essay. And Tiago several times and Dave several times have like pointed at an essay that's 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 words. And it was like, from the time that I started on that essay until I was done was like 65 minutes. I'm like, how is that possible? Well, because he had all of these sort of raw material that was accruing naturally through their own processes, which Rosano was pointing out, like all this stuff just sort of builds up doing his own thing over time until eventually he can sort, group, massage, tidy, and publish in a very short period of time.
Yeah, I actually just read a post by Cory Doctorow today called the Memex Method, where he talks about his way of collecting these fragments is actually to just blog them in public, and then over 15 to 20 years he like referenced those public things, and it very easily turns into like stuff. But you mentioned something that I forgot, which is like I never look at a blank slate. I think it's important to like not look at a blank slate, because it's sort of like a weird place to start. Like I'm never twiddling my thumbs like, oh, what should I write? Like it's like, so maybe that's like, yeah, to start with this collecting or is something that can be helpful.
I would say that the number one thing that I want, and I've experimented with various versions of this, is in talking about the non-blank slate. I think Backlinks does really interesting stuff with in systems that have autocomplete, where you're like, I think this is what I want to write. What did I write before that might substring match this? But that alone, that autocomplete thing, we shouldn't have to start with a blank slate. We've had a lot of digital interactions, and if we own them and have access to them, we should be able to search across them in interesting ways. Sometimes it's an exhaust system. Like I actually feel pretty good about my my Twitter likes. So, it's another one of those, all right, like I literally could run an entire link blog that is just my Twitter likes. And if someone cares, because this is all public, you can get a pretty good picture of my brain, because I like a lot more things, and like means a lot of different things, right? So there's that as well. You won't know what I mean, right? I tend not to like things as a bookmark if like this is a tweet that I'm enraged by and this person is a jerk. I won't heart it, right? But you'll see my positive thoughts if you take that, right? And that's just something that mostly is not accessible.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my workflows, I write a weekly newsletter as well. And one of the things that I put in my workflow is like, here's some things that I've consumed recently over the course of this week that I thought were interesting. So it could be an article, it could be a YouTube video, it could be a Twitter thread, it could be something that was thought-provoking. And then I write a little bit about why it was thought-provoking for me. But my workflow around that is if it's a Twitter thread or a tweet or something, I use bookmarks in Twitter instead of likes. And so when I sit down on Monday mornings to write my newsletter, I literally go pull up my Twitter bookmarks and I'm like, what's been bookmarked in the last 7 days? And then I'm like, great, there's one. And then I can drop those straight into my newsletter, add a few sentences of exposition of like why this was interesting to me. And then that's just a really simple workflow.
Collating, curating, expanding, annotating, lists.
Yeah, but Rosano's method is so much stronger, and it's definitely made me think about it a lot, because he's exactly right. What he said about, I don't want the list to live within other applications like YouTube and Twitter and that kind of stuff. I can't currently make twist lists across applications. That I need a cross application queue. And thank you for like demonstrating your system, Rosano, because it's pretty powerful.
Thanks.
Simple and powerful.
So a lot of the indie web people take the attitude of everything starting in their own app and then publishing outward.
Indicate elsewhere, yeah.
So the posse method of, you write your tweet in your system and then it publishes to Twitter, and that way you still have the original tweet in your corpus. The other way is to go the other direction and suck things in. So if you have some way of importing your tweets and likes into your own base, then you have all that stuff together there. But both of them are a pain in the ass.
What is that? So posse is the on your own site. What's the reverse one? What's that acronym again?
Pesos.
Yeah, I mean, I technically have my personal blog does just that. It uses microblog to, I don't really think of it as cross-posting. It literally is just publishing to both Mastodon and that. But I think there's also something about the simplicity and the fluidity. I think that's the trouble with the indie web thing. There's a lot of yak shaving bits and pieces there, and you don't have the fluidity of the native interface of like.
Right. That's why I'm interested in going the other direction, more of using the affordances of the, you've got the Twitter native app on your phone, and so it's much more, it's always going to be better than anything that, you're trying to create your own Twitter client. That's just like a pain in the ass.
Well, I actually think that that's an interesting direction. I have money set aside for it, and I'm looking for someone to program this with me. Where exactly that would happen is that you have something that it is a Twitter client, but is also your note-taking app.
Yeah.
And lets you do both of those things. There's a couple of these around, but none of them are open source, so we can't really build on them.
There's a lot of people who've been talking about that, and it's just getting it right, getting the design right, and then figuring out how to host it and what the economic model is, given that it takes some time.
Yeah, I mean, I think like that's the thing. It's not. I mean, this is the really interesting thing about this stuff. Like someone has to have the time and the will to do the first version of it, kind of thing like that. But from there, ideally, you build it so that it is a bit moldable, so that people can see that it's possible, and work on it.
And I mean, the other piece of the risk is, do you end up with something that is talking to Twitter enough that they start blocking you? And so like, how does that work from an API management and risk management kind of thing? That I think that the games that they did 10 years ago or 5 years ago took a lot of momentum away from people trying to create these kinds of, mashups around Twitter.
There's an old word, right, Bill? Mashup. Literally invented circa like 04, 05, when we had delicious Flickr and things like that. Blogger.
Mark, I think you had
Go for it.
A comment or question.
Yeah. No, that's a fascinating issue, right? We're either doing things in other platforms and then risk we can't control. Is the API available? Like I wrote something that was going to interpret with Facebook, alas, because it was asked. And then of course, Facebook changed their API and I couldn't get things out of it anymore. So that was a lot of work wasted. And that's life on the one hand. And I do understand. I mean, even if I case Facebook with passion, their point is a lot of they want to keep the information so that the users, the writers, can supposedly control who sees it. If it's exported, nobody has that control anymore. If you go the other way, it's your system, it's bespoke, nobody knows how to speak to it. So we desperately need standards and ways to have little snippets with clear ways to transport them across systems, clear ways to express them, and clear ways to mark when it's not public, the ACL of it. And this is why I think, like for example, there was amazing work around Solid around that, and it didn't take us beyond the point, but the idea of having these little snippets of information with a defined schema that could be shared, and we even had queuing, right? You could queue little snippets of information from one system to another. And I think that's vital. We need to revive this notion of let's make these information snippets that can move across systems. And that I think that's part of what a lot of us were interested in here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Andy Machuchak wrote a tweet that I will put in the notes where he crystallized, I'm like, exactly, basically saying export considered harmful. And initially we were like tools for thought interchange, and interchange was my placeholder word to mean not export, essentially. Right. And that's this challenge, is that people think of export as interchange, but it isn't really, for a lot of subtle reasons that Andy went into good details on his thread, right?
And get some good conversation around that thread too from other people. It's interesting. I've noticed how Andy, he's a central point for a bunch of different people in related things, and so his Twitter ends up being a sort of an agora for conversations around all of these related topics, because so many people follow him for different reasons. And so when he posts a series of thoughts around this, they end up being all of the comments on those by those folks are actually just as interesting, if not more interesting, than even his original observations. There was one other note I was going to make. I forgot what it was. Oh, I think another angle the angle that I'm taking to work on this problem is just making it easier to program in general. So I think that, and I know that that's like a really big kind of squishy thing, but just very simply, like if it is, if we can enable 20% more people to write programs because it's easier, like we lower the ceiling, so to speak, or lower the floor. I think that's the term that you would want. Lower the floor to make it easier to program, and to be able to deploy programs and all of the things around it that are hard to program, or hard because programming is hard. Then I think that makes it easier for us to do things like invest the time into building a custom Twitter client and that kind of stuff, because it just costs less, and there are more people out there that are possibly going to be interested in doing that. And so it's kind of like the Doug Engelbart phrase of like improving the rate at which you can improve. I feel like if you can make programming easier, I don't know of a much more productive way to make it to improve the rate at which we can improve computers. And so anyway, it's kind of the angle I'm coming from.
And yeah, Rome obviously with trying to expose chunks of closure is one approach there, and that's going to work great for some people and not for others. It's always a tricky thing of like where the wall is, or where the hill gets really steep, and what's the safety is the other key thing. Is like, oh shit, I just deleted all of my notes because I had a comma in the wrong place.
Exactly. Right, and I think this speaks to a bunch of other things like that. Well, like if storage is free, obviously you should keep a version.
Right.
Like why are we not building the tools that have versioning by default, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Storage is free for one person, and storage is free for 100 people, but storage isn't free for 1 million people, maybe as much. And so it's always the like, when do those lines
but it
get
is
ugly?
because every single device that we have has enough storage to keep all textual content that the human holding the device will ever write. So yes, it is free.
For non-video content, asterisk, just like at the for non-video content. Although this is a crazy one, and this is totally off tangent, but the ability to use a machine learning algorithm to regenerate the video portion of video content and use metadata to basically encode
right
is very promising for compression.
So
right?
what we're doing is we're actually just sending over the avatar version, and then we just have to send across motion vectors.
It upscales NVIDIA upscales it for you on the GPU. Boom, done.
Ouch.
I expect it on my desk by Monday, Jess.
Yeah, this is interesting. I think but Bill brings up an interesting point in the making programming easier. There's a lot of really hard problems to solve. One of those things is like, how do we keep people from how do you keep people from hurting themselves in that process? There's the security, there's the, how do you get apps in people's hands, that kind of stuff. One of the things I love about seeing Rosano's systems is just how simple they are. Of like, there's not a lot there. And I think Linus's systems, I've spent some time tooling around his like side projects, had similar characteristics. They're very simple. And mainly because they're mostly written by a single person, right? Who has limited time, and that of necessity makes them simpler systems than some of the software that I've personally written myself as part of a team, and software that we often use.
I think, thanks for dropping that link to Linus's Twitter client. And that's an example where I'm like, that's really cool. And it exists. Boris, why don't you build on it? It's like, because he's got this funky stack that is essentially unusable by any other developer coming in wanting to extend it. So I have these other biases of like, actually, I want to like, build it local first and probably in React or Svelte or something. Right. So we go all the way down to the flavor of framework that we might want. Right. And I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing. That's just different goals.
I mean, his has a pretty incredible constraint in that it's written in a programming language that only one person on the planet uses, which is Linus himself. So that is a pretty limiting constraint.
So Rosano, I mean, honestly, we're a little disappointed that you didn't write your own programming language for all of these. It's,
no plans,
JavaScript.
No plans, yeah. I'm not even using TypeScript, I'm using the thing that's like natively supported. And...
I think also it's pretty important to consider everything that one would consider personal and private, and making it really so darn easy for an individual to say, well, this chunk of stuff that I wrote is for public consumption, and this stuff is totally private, and not make it really difficult to make a mistake, to publish something that's extremely private, extremely personal, and could be harmful onto a public platform.
So yes, also impossible. There's probably a halting problem or something like that in there. I fixed this by having two separate systems. Does that suck a lot because I end up having stuff in private that I actually want public? Right, but it means that by default, I don't leak things. This came up on a previous call where it's like, what if we had a convention that did this, that, and the other thing? And I'm like, cool. You're literally talking about the uniqueness of your particular tool and how you work for that to work for you. So I don't even know if it's generalizable at all.
If I could ask a fission,
do you want to like mirror it private and public, or do you want two slightly different forks in the private and public? Like everyone's got a different thing for that.
If I could ask a fission specific question about that, Boris, because like I never understood how if you put something on IPFS, you can't take it away. So like the way to not accidentally publish something is like just to not have it in the system. Like you're saying essentially like people should just use two systems, or like?
No, I mean apps wise, really at the end of the day. So like the fission specific thing is like, if you put anything on the internet for any period of time, it is one, cached in a bunch of systems in between, right? Like the fallacy of, well, it's in a server that I have secured that no one else can get to. I'm like, you just put bits on the internet, like, cool. You know, like basically, what's your threat model? What do you need to do about it? How do you care? So there are two approaches that are happening simultaneously right now. Fission's belief is that all of the pipes are broken and leaky. And so we encrypt all content end to end with only the user having the keys. And then we can pass it over whatever we like in between. Everything can be broken, doesn't matter. There are opaque blobs that you can do that. The other half, Tailscale is one example that is amazing if you haven't checked it out. It essentially says, you know, back in the day when we had a local LAN and we could like trust all the machines in the LAN, that's a really great programming environment that we can do interesting things with. So they build on the fly VPNs. So they assume everything is broken and build secure pipes. And so they don't have to care about the security of the data going over those pipes, because they build new pipes over top. And this is, what's it called? Google, Microsoft, and others are realizing this as well. And they have some approaches around this where, like, you know, in the past, a lot of businesses used VPNs. You have to have a VPN to come from home. But like, so right now the like secure castle where inside the company is secure. Well, if you have cloud systems and local systems and everything else like that, it's very porous. So they're going to this, like, we need to put secure pipes over top and assume that everywhere is a hostile environment. So it's a long answer because, again, there's like, this is stuff that's just happening right now, and coming up with really interesting models because of it. Right? The Tailscale in particular, there's lots of really, really neat things that you can do if you can treat all the devices and the humans on them as being secure. You all of a sudden don't have to build user accounts or much of anything into your system. Whereas, you know, like if you put a wiki on the internet that other people can write into, you know what happens.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about Linus Lee. He did an interview recently with the Muse guys, Adam Wiggins and Mark McGranahan. There's a podcast you can listen to. I listened to it this afternoon, actually, and kind of thinking about this topic before a meeting with Rosano. And one of the things he mentioned about his applications being really, really simple is that he doesn't have to do auth because he's only building applications for himself. He basically has it set up such that he has a private VPN to a single DigitalOcean box where all of his stuff runs. And he's like, if I get through that VPN, then it's me. And like how much that simple, and he talked about that was an example of one of the many simplifying assumptions that he can make when he's writing personal software. It was really exciting to me to think about that. Like, if we can lower the bar, make programming easier, and does it make it easier for us to make our own applications? If we make it easier to make our own applications, are those applications actually by design, intrinsically simpler, and leave out some of the complexity that we have to solve for in modern software companies and things like that? I don't know. It feels like maybe those things will like meet as they move towards each other of late. Anyway.
Absolutely. So this is the user-owned data approach of remote storage, and what Fission is doing in Solid is you don't have to build multi-tenant databases because everybody's bringing their own databases, and so a bunch of the schemas are actually naturally more portable too, because you're literally just storing the units because the user is implied. You don't have to do this other thing. Now, the challenge is you then have to reach up and come with protocols of how you aggregate identified chunks for other people, but in this good way where everybody keeps owning their stuff.
It's definitely like, for me as a developer, I don't have to think about auth. All of my apps work with those zero data protocols that Boris mentioned. So it's like, I also know that everything's happening in the browser. So that's also kind of another security thing. Like I can just turn the internet off, and helps also if it's open source, so you know where things are being stored, or you can check where it's happening. But it does make it like simpler. I think for me, it lowers the bar. Like I don't think I would have as many apps if I had to create like a server backend auth stuff. Like if I had to do that for every single one, it would be pretty taxing. So I'm glad that like Vision exists, remote storage exists, that I can just plug my identity in and it works on multiple devices. And yeah, it's pretty great as a developer.
Eric has a comment here in chat that I thought was worth repeating. He says, that's interesting. If we usually put value on reuse of software, but perhaps if software became much easier to create, there's not really a need to reuse things as much. And Linus actually mentioned that in the interview as well. He said when his stuff breaks or rots, sometimes he just throws it away and rewrites it because it's so easy to rewrite using his stack and his like stuff that in a lot of times it's just simpler to just rewrite it. And throw it away. And he also, he also mentioned that several of his applications he considers done. Like he's not ever adding more features to them. He hasn't touched them in years and he's still using them. And to have software, I think that also flies in the face of the way that I was taught to think about software as a production software engineer at a company. Software's never done. There's always more features to be adding. There's always bit rot of like the environment changes around the software and the software decays and that kind of stuff. But the idea that we could have software that's so simple that it's done, and if it did rot, that we could quickly replace it is a really interesting place.
But I mean, the flip side is essentially this is kind of similar to the, the GitHub and open source and forking model, which is you've got these little chunks of software and they're relatively easy to create, but then everybody wants their own version of it. So they all fork them. And so you really end up with, 500 versions that are 95% identical and differ in ways that are totally illegible. And then if one person has a good idea and somebody else has a good idea, trying to merge those two together, like there's a huge unsolvable trade-off there.
Right, but I no, there isn't, right? Because that's what you're describing is Rome, TiddlyWiki, and Logsec, right? Where they focus on end user programmable building blocks. You still have much of those other things, and then people start going like, oh, I would like that, I would like your setup as a plugin, right? And I'm using that very generically. Like there are systems that have those things. Obsidian has those things. TiddlyWiki has things that are called plugin, but TiddlyWiki also has grabbed these three things that have some CSS and wiki text, which is their like programming markup. Yeah. So that's both the data being separate and then having a programmable layer.
Yep.
We are close to time in lots of things. Let's hit the stop recording. I think I quickly want to do a screen share of just a few notes that I've taken just to give people an example. And maybe even actually I will show my TiddlyWiki groceries. People who are watching this on video, you have to come live next time. Wait for all the people who are watching this afterwards.